Hey everybody, before we get into today's show, I want to tell you about a really cool new dating app out there. People might say, John, why are you talking about dating apps? You're married. Mark's married, Brian's married, three married guys talking about a dating app. Well, let me tell you why, because this, my friends, is a dating app that libertarians need, that people who have strong beliefs, strong value systems need. All the other dating apps out there, they don't let you search for your mate, search for your significant other, search for a potential spouse based on a values-based matching system. And if you're a libertarian, this is something that is definitely something near and dear to your heart. You don't want to end up matched with a statist. Drone actually allows you to set and pick your own deal breakers and deal makers. It's going to match you with someone based on that. You get a notification. Get this, guys. It's no swiping left or right, none of that nonsense. It's no texting. It's no leaving voice messages. It's all video based. So you're going to get to see the person that you're talking to on a screen. There's no catfishing nonsense, none of that. Let me tell you about how you can get Drome. It's free, but what you're going to do is go to Drome, that's D-R-O-M, drome.date/lions. And once you bring it up in your phone's browser, you download the app, and you're going to use the invite code LIONS to sign up. If you're a single person out there looking for love in the Liberty universe, stop sliding into the Twitter DMs and being creepy. Get out there, set up a profile on Drome, and find somebody who matches your value system and start talking to them face to face. Just go to drome.date/lions. Use invite code LIONS. Make it happen today, guys. Come on.
We are born free, and we will die free. The time in between, though, that's complicated. In that time, governments, institutions, and our egos will limit our ability to find true freedom in this life. These are real stories of real people overcoming the odds, persevering in justice, and unlocking their potential. Welcome to Finding Freedom. Here's your host, John Odermatt.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Finding Freedom here on the Lions of Liberty podcast. And really excited about today's show, something that I'm very passionate about, that I know a lot of people are very concerned and shocked by what they're seeing happening in Australia with regards to coronavirus lockdowns. Just disgusting stuff that's happening there. And there's really, when I saw it happening, sure, I could bring someone on the show from the U.S. to talk about it, but I thought, why not try to find somebody who's on the ground in Australia to give me a report of what's happening, reactions of people who are for this, to tap into really what is the temperature on the ground in Australia and what's going to happen going forward, kind of looking into the crystal ball. So I found a friend, LibertyDownUnder on Twitter. We're going to be speaking with him. A great conversation. You guys are going to love it. And if you want to see the video version of it, you can go to our YouTube channel. It's posted up there. It's also going to be on Odyssey as well. So I never promote our video content. If you didn't know, pretty much every show we do now, almost every show, has video accompanying it on YouTube or Odyssey, wherever you decide you want to watch. So do that. Or if you haven't, please subscribe to the channel. Helps us out. Wherever you listen to this podcast, give us a subscription. And if you want to support us, please do so by going to patreon.com/Lions of Liberty. Let's get to the show. I don't want to waste any time. I'm joined here on a special live edition of Finding Freedom with LibertyDownUnder. Now, this guy, so a little backstory to this before I do a full introduction. I obviously, with what's happening in Australia, in the United States, we're kind of disconnected from it. We see what happens on TV, and we're all pretty shocked by what we're seeing. And I put out some feelers on Twitter. I said, Twitter, who should I talk to? Who should I talk to in Australia? Who's plugged in? Who's a a liberty-minded person in Australia? And I had multiple people come back and say, you got to talk to Liberty Down Under. So that's who I'm joined by today, Liberty Down Under. He's now it's spelled a little differently. It's Liberty. It's at Liberty Down Under without the E on under on Twitter. And he's a 19-year-old. Very ambitious guy. He's involved with the local libertarian politics over there. He's looking to get into law and international business, and he's somebody who is working hard for libertarian ideals in Australia, and he's plugged in on the ground. So, welcome to the show, man.
Oh, it's good to be here.
Let's start off before we get into I'm sure everybody wants to hear about what's happening in Australia, what your opinions are on it, the people and what's happening on the ground. But before we get to that, man, how does a 19-year-old in Australia come across the ideas of liberty and get interested in this?
So I've had a bit of a crazy political journey. So back in 2016, when we had the US elections, I was a Social Democrat, and today I am an ANCAP. So it's been a very, very, very radical trip. So by 2018, I was a neocon. I was watching a lot of Stephen Crowder, and then came across the word libertarian. I was like, well, what does this mean? I started reading into it. I was like, well, I agree with this, and so ended up like moving down more and more into libertarianism, and ended up being an ANCAP by this year. So really pushed me over the edge was seeing our lockdowns in 2020, which were ridiculous. So that's really pushed me over the edge. I know a lot of Australians were radicalized by the lockdowns.
So that was like the moment in time. So just to turn the clock back. So I know in the US it was was it March? I guess it was March of 2020 when they kind of did that initial, it was the 15 days to flatten the curve, which turned into months and months. What was the timeline in Australia? When did the first lockdowns happen in Australia?
So they were March as well, March of 2020. They were lifted middle of winter, which is a summer for you guys. Mm-hmm. But we've had lots and lots of snap lockdowns since then. I know Melbourne went into a 4-month lockdown in the second half of 2020. And they're in their 6th lockdown in 18 months right now.
And
down in Melbourne.
What part of Australia are you in?
So I'm in Queensland, which is the northern state on the east coast. It's got the point at the top, and Victoria's and Melbourne are down the bottom.
And so where you are in Queensland, have you experienced lockdowns there as well?
So I experienced the initial ones. I've been fortunate since then. I'm just far enough away from Brisbane, the state's capital, to have avoided the recent lockdowns. But I know people who are literally 10 kilometers away from me who had the lockdowns in place. So it's been quite arbitrary how it's worked in Queensland, but I'm very fortunate to have avoided those lockdowns. But I've definitely been seeing a lot of stuff in New South Wales and in Victoria about this recent lockdowns.
So tell us about, because we just see, let's just jump right into it. So this past, what was it, Saturday, maybe it was Friday, I'm not sure how the time works with the time zones, but there was a big protest in, I guess that was that in Sydney, where there's a big protest where they, you know what I'm talking about, where they broke through the police lines? What part of Australia was that in?
So the story that you Americans have mostly seen was the Melbourne one, where they had the right police were sent in with pepper spray, and they're pepper spraying children and whatnot. And then we had a second protest, which is in Sydney. It was not as bad, but it was still lots of arrests there. I think a day or two before, they sentenced a young person who organised the lockdowns in the lockdown protests to 8 months behind bars for organising protests. And then in other capital cities, including Brisbane, it was the police wanted the protests, but there weren't any real arrests because those states aren't in lockdown.
So like what I see, what we see from America, and it's got to be annoying for people in Australia to you're in the heat of this experience in it, and you see Americans on Twitter saying, "Oh, you Aussies, what are you doing over there? You're acting like a bunch of bitches. You're not standing up." But you guys are in the heat of the battle. So what is the temperature on the ground there? Because what we see on Facebook are a lot of the lefties, the left Aussies speaking out in favor of these lockdowns, and maybe the other stuff is suppressed. But if you had to give like a gauge of on the ground, like how much support does this have?
So I was talking. I did a podcast with a Liberty Lockdown with Clint on Saturday during the protests, which were doing Friday night your time, and I said then it's probably about 5%. But having seen the lockdowns happen, and then the next day they went and protested on the New South Wales Queensland border, protesting the new border restrictions, which are basically only essential workers can travel across, and you've got to have the vaccine to do so. So there were hundreds, if not thousands, of people there protesting. So I want to say it's something like 10-15% of the people in Australia are anti-lockdown. That's of course generalizing. So in certain places there'll be more and less in others, but
right.
It is coming to a boiling point. I know all the truckies are going to try and protest on Friday, but not driving anywhere because they're sick of it, because all the borders are being closed affects them because they're driving across states.
Yeah,
so it's
I
really
saw
getting
that.
quite intense here.
There was a tweet that I guess went viral where there was a truckie who was saying that they had they had their whole group together was going to shut down, and I think they said that some military vets were also with them.
Yes, I didn't see the one about the military vets, but yeah, definitely a lot of the truckies. I don't think it's all of them, but most of them. I know one of the trade unions of truckies was like 90% of people supported the strike on Friday. So it's definitely going to be a big thing, and I'm looking forward to seeing what happens there.
Just to talk about, because I know that speaking out in Australia obviously has come with penalties. People who've protested have been fined. You see stories of teenagers who go out just trying to have some fun with their friends drinking, and they end up getting rounded up by helicopters, coming in. You see stories like that. Are you worried? So you're coming on a show here that's going to be broadcast and put out there. Are you worried speaking out? Like what's your temperature for stuff like that?
So when I first got into social media politics, which would have been November last year, I was definitely like, don't put my face out there, don't do anything. But right now it's like, we have to do something because what we have right now is not working. So that's why I'm coming on all these podcasts and putting my face out here and like doing a call to action, because we have to do something, because we can't keep going the way we are, because if we keep doing what we're doing, we'll just be submissive and the government can walk all over us.
So let's flip back and talk about coronavirus. So I think maybe the view for coronavirus is a little different in Australia in the mainstream than it is in the US. And it's not perfect in the US, but I think a lot of people in the US kind of understand that this is a virus that, it's not going to go away. We can't lock everything down. It's going to disappear. It's going to be here. That's not to
Tell
say
us that.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I mean, sure, pro-vax, against vaccination. I'm not vaccinated, but if people want to get vaccinated, I have no problem with it. But when you look at Australia, the way that they're managing it, do they not understand that it's there's animal vectors and it's not going away? Is that widespread?
So our Prime Minister, which is our version of the President, has said recently, we can't get COVID-0. But the state premiers of Queensland, Western Australia, and Victoria, all of whom are Labor, which is our version of the Democrats, have said no. We want to get rid of COVID completely. So they're trying to go for a COVID-0. So every time we get a single case of COVID, you go into lockdown. Yeah, you got to do everything you can to stop that from spreading, because we can't have any COVID in Australia whatsoever. It's the same in New Zealand. They locked down when they had one case turn up, and they immediately went into a lockdown.
That's just,
and their government is Labor as well there. So, but it's definitely worse coming from the left than it is on the right. But even the right in Australia has been supporting it to some extent. The police minister from New South Wales, who's a conservative, from the Liberal National Party, he asks for soldiers from the federal government to come in and enforce lockdowns in Sydney. The Prime Minister, also a conservative, obliged to send in 300 soldiers. There's now 800 soldiers in Sydney and the surrounding areas to enforce lockdowns and support the police. So we're at the point where the Conservatives support the government sending in the soldiers against their own citizens. And the Deputy Police Commissioner of New South Wales just recently said, report your neighbours. If they're breaking lockdown, report your neighbours. And people have been.
That's the most disturbing part. And that's also the same thing in the United States, is that people are quick to, when we were in lockdown, quick to report on their neighbor, quick to report on someone not wearing a mask, quick to turn someone else in. It's sick. It's a sickness. And it's not that, I think as libertarians, one of the things that we have a blind spot for is we're quick to point to the state, point to the ills of the state, and kind of miss that actually, well, who is the state? When you peel back the layers, the state is made up of the people supporting it, the people propping it up, the people voting in these democratically, elected governments. And who votes? That's your neighbors, your community. So, of course, when the shit hits the fan and you have a pandemic, the people who are voting to coercively steal from their neighbor, to do things of that nature, are also going to be quick to turn their neighbor in if it goes against what they believe in or what they think is not safe for them or their family, which is it's troubling, and it's a problem with the fabric of our society. So, I don't know if it's hard. Like, I guess, like, from my perspective, and my question would be, like, when I look at the United States, I feel like we have, I don't know. I was going to say, I feel like we have more of a split, I guess, where maybe that prevents us a little bit more with the red and the blue states from having a devolving situation like has happened in some parts of Australia, but maybe not. So how does Australia, or I guess, does Australia come back from this? How do you guys break free from this tyranny?
I genuinely have no idea. So the way I'm trying to approach it right now is through getting involved in the political party that's just been set up. It's a new libertarian party. They've literally said to me, "Hey, do you want to come on and do content creation for us for social media and set up a podcast, that sort of stuff?" So I've got a lot of flack from Americans for getting involved in politics.
What kind of flack? What kind of flack you getting from Americans?
Well, I'm not a real ANCAP because I am involved with political parties.
Tell them to shut up. At the end of the day, yes, I understand where they're coming from. You have to be careful with the ANCAPs, and at the end of the day, yes, politics probably is not the answer, but you have to assemble a base. You have to find out who's on your side, right? And how else are you going to do that?
So the way I'm approaching it is because we've got mandatory voting here. So if I was an American, I probably wouldn't vote, but because we've got mandatory voting here and it's preferential voting, my sense is if I, vote for libertarian parties, then they'll get more attention in the media. People will go look them up, and then people will read the manifestos, and we could win some converts to the libertarian cause, and we can win the cultural war instead. So I'm using politics for a culture to achieve a victory in the cultural war, because that's what we're going to win. Politicians, power power corrupts. But if we get involved in the grassroots with the community and change their minds, then people will actually start waking up to what's happening. That's the stance I take on it.
Yeah. So when you're reaching out to and doing social media work for libertarian ideas in Australia, what types of things are you sending out? What types of messaging are you doing? Are you taking messaging from America? Are you going back to people like Ludwig von Mises, Murray Rothbard? What types of ideas are you pulling from?
So I'm still waiting to be given access to their accounts because they've just been set up. They're literally like 100 days old. So I'm still waiting for them. They've still got to set everything up. But the impression I'm going to take is more like talking about like news events and that sort of stuff, because theory is not big down here. Like, you can't go to your local library and find books on Rothbard or Mises or Hayek or Hopper.
Well, to be honest, where you guys are, probably theory is not useful. I mean,
yeah,
these are desperate times. So, yeah.
So I personally own a lot of theory, but I'm the exception, not the rule down here.
So, well, let me put it this way. So when you do get access, what's your plan for attracting more people to these ideas? What kind of pressure points are you going to try to press on to wake people up?
So right now, the big push that we're going to try and look at is going after the lockdowns, because that's right now is all that's being spoken about in Australia. So that's our main push. Things like gun rights and that sort of stuff are also important, but right now our concern is with the lockdowns.
So what are the gun laws in Australia?
They're hopeless. You can go on Wikipedia and look them up. It's got listed the categories there, but it's very limited as to what we can have. In 1996, we had the Port Arthur massacre in Tasmania. That's the island down off the mainland. And then the Conservative government put in gun control laws. So the things that Americans don't understand, the fact that in Australia, the left and the right both support like the welfare state and hate speech laws and gun bans, that sort of stuff, a lot more than the GOP does in America.
That's actually not too far from what's happening in America either. But
at least the Republicans have like the rhetoric of gun rights. We didn't even have that down here. If you're pro-gun, you're far right.
So they're not even the right in Australia is not even pretending to be pro-gun, is what you're saying. They're not even running on that.
Well, they love that John Howard, who is the person who put in place these gun control laws, is heralded as a hero by conservatives.
Wow.
So they don't care about the gun ban because he's such a great guy. It'd be like if Trump put in place a gun ban, but because all the MAGA heads love him so much, they'd ignore the gun ban and say he's such a great person.
Well, that's actually Trump did put in some gun control laws,
but less so than say Obama would have probably.
So are you like? Is it possible to own what do you have to do if you want to get a firearm just for hunting in Australia? Is that something that can be done?
No, not for hunting. So you can have it if you're a farmer. So that'd be my grandfather is a farmer, so I've been fortunate enough to be able to have firearms. So you can use it to hunt down pests and stuff on your property, or for self-defense on your property if you're a farmer. Or you can have a gun if you're a recreational shooter, and you got to join a gun club to do that.
What about for hunting? So you can't get a gun even for hunting in Australia?
So I don't know the specifics on that, but I think you've got to be quite rural. So you can't. I can't go out and get a gun to go hunting animals where I am right now.
Just because you're in the city. Okay.
Yeah. So it wouldn't be a reasonable grounds for it. So we do have more guns now than we had after the amnesty finished in 1997, where people handed in all their guns. We do have guns, more guns now than then. So the Australian left is when we bring up guns, they're like, stop complaining about it because you have more guns now than you had then. But the problem is that we've gained 7 or 8 million more Australians. So although we have more guns, we've got a lot more people. So the proportion of households that own guns has dropped by 75%. The people who are buying guns already have guns.
Right. So you're not getting any really new guns into circulation.
No.
So, I mean, so that really goes back to, with these lockdowns, there's really no threat of a pushback. So when you look at
Americans that I talk.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
A lot of Americans I talk to online are like, oh, if you guys hadn't given up your guns, you could fight back. But the way I see it is, it's not necessarily that. Like, if we didn't give up our guns, we wouldn't have a submissive mindset. So we have the same mindset that we had in 1996 that we have now of, being submissive to the state because they're protecting us. If we didn't give up our guns, that would show that we had a different mindset to what we actually have right now. So that's the way I see it. It's not the mere fact that we gave up our guns. It's the whole mindset behind it.
Mm-hmm. It was a mindset that it's not that the guns were really taken away. I mean, tell me if I'm reading this wrong. It's that they were willingly given up for the most part.
Yeah, people willingly gave up their guns to be destroyed by the government.
Why do you think that was? I mean, it's just a cultural change, or was there? I mean, was there violence that was happening, or what did the government sort of use to influence people to do that?
So we had one mass shooting and that was it, and the government said, okay, give your guns up. So think about Sandy Hook. Sandy Hook's a bit smaller than Port Arthur was. So if after Sandy Hook, the government said, all right, give up all your guns. That's basically what we had happen here.
And everyone did, or not everyone, but people did.
But people gave up most of their guns that were outside of the categories that are allowed. So yeah, lots of guns were given up.
All right, we got a comment here. I'm going to pull this up. The man Crocodile Dundee was based off. This is not worded well. Based off died after a days-long gunfight when he came to confiscate his guns. Is that true? I don't know if that's true.
I haven't heard that story. No, but I do know that the knives that he uses, you probably couldn't get away with most of Australia. Like, you can't own knives for self-defense. Again, it's the same sort of reasoning as it is for guns. So, you've got to be rural or on a farm. But most Australians can't own guns like that and can't carry them on their body. So a few years ago, we had a guy got a knife and he went on a stabbing rampage. I think it was either Sydney or Melbourne, and people gave chase with milk crates and wicker chairs to stop him.
That's ridiculous.
No one has weapons for self-defense. So when someone goes and uses a weapon, they have to use whatever they can find.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, that's wicker chairs. Somebody has a knife, you're chasing them with a wicker chair. Sorry, I'm laughing, but that's insane. It's just so crazy to think, and I don't even think the U.S. is that far behind this happening. But it's almost like Australia is a little bit ahead of where the USA, I feel like is going, and kind of this pandemic just caught at this time that. I feel terrible for the entire country of Australia, but I feel terrible especially for the people who love individual liberty and who are fighting down there. So when you reach out to, I mean, just for an example, I mean, when you look at your, other 19, 20, 21-year-olds, 18-year-olds, those types of people in Australia, younger people, where do they generally fall in this? Are they in favor of these lockdowns? Are they going for it? Are they skeptical? Somewhere in between?
So I'm at university right now, so you can imagine people who they're all leftists, basically. Most leftists, they're around my age, like early Gen Z, late millennial leftists. at least the ones that I interact with, people who are looking at getting into white collar jobs at least.
So like all of them, or have you met anybody who is sympathetic to your ideas?
I have met a couple of conservatives. I've known libertarians, a couple of conservatives, but most people who are on the left. Like I've only met one libertarian in my entire life. That's because I went to school with him. But he was classical liberal, and he left school before I finished, so I don't know what he's like now for politics. But like most Australian libertarians will never meet another libertarian like for much of their life unless they're involved in politics.
Wow. So if you trace back your like the house you grew up in, your parents are leftists as well, or?
No, so they're conservative.
Okay.
Christian evangelical conservative. That's what my parents are.
So at what point growing up, did you start to question, these leftist ideas, these conservative ideas, and start to look towards libertarian ideals?
So I started off as being on the left. In 2017, we had a same-sex marriage plebiscite, which is basically a postal vote for all the citizens. It's one of the few times that we have actually had voluntary voting in Australia, so it wasn't mandatory for once. So I went to school with a guy who was gay and a lesbian as well. And I remember talking to them, and I said, well, we should at least, let the right speak. For context, where I live is the middle of the Bible Belt. So when we had the vote happen, we were one of the few federal electorates who voted against same-sex marriage. So the gay and the lesbian I was talking to were like, we can't even let the right speak their opinion on this. So they was really disenfranchised with the PC culture going forward from then. And so that made me, look into this. Then Stephen Crowder came up actually recommended for my on YouTube, because I was watching a lot of John Oliver and Trevor Noah, and Stephen Crowder came up as recommended, and I watched one of his videos and loved it and got into conservative politics. But then 2019, I'm looking at like Trump and seeing like he's not really conservative. Like looking at his policies, he's not. Yeah, he's got the rhetoric there, but his policies are completely like not what conservatives say their policies should be, like the red flag laws and stuff like that. So that disenfranchised me from the right, and I started getting involved in libertarianism, and went down that route, which is where I am now. But most Australians aren't exposed to that sort of stuff. They're exposed to the standard left and the right, and because things are so linear down here, the media calls classical liberals as they're hard right. If you're anti-lockdown, you're far right.
Mm-hmm. So that's interesting.
That's the state of things right now.
That's interesting talking. So you were looking at a modeling after Stephen Crowder in the U.S. obviously, and looking at Trump and being like, well, this guy's not really conservative. What's happening? So is that something that's common for Australians to look at the United States and as kind of a mirror for their politics?
No, it's not. So half of my degree is international relations, which is like world politics and foreign affairs. So, I was always interested in politics. So that's why I was following America so closely, because what America is, Australia does, like people call us the 51st state. Although we're worse than California, but we're the 51st state of America sometimes. So, I was always paying attention to what America does. And so, I was seeing a lot of stuff about Trump and to a lesser extent, Australian premiers and prime ministers, but who claim to be conservative. It was especially Trump. And I was like, he's not conservative at all.
No, he was just a populist, and it'll be, not to get sidetracked, but it'll be interesting to see what happens if Trump runs again, with how terrible Joe Biden's doing, and especially when you go against the war machine, and he's pulled out of Afghanistan and done it in a pretty remarkably bad fashion. It'll be interesting to see what happens. I don't know.
Well, remember he was Obama's vice president, and Obama stopped up Benghazi, so he's learned from the worst.
Yeah, well, it's funny. Like Joe Biden thinks like he says things. Well, he's senile, but he says things and doesn't think like anyone's paying attention to the timeline. And he's like, well, yeah, I remember 10 years ago I was saying we should have been out of Afghanistan. It's like, well, you were the vice president then, man. Like you can't just say you were saying it and then you were there. It should have happened. You should have had some influence. It's an indictment on you. But anyway, I'm glad the U.S. is out of Afghanistan. It's just remarkably pitiful the way they pulled out and have left people behind when obviously they knew what was going to happen, that they knew the Taliban was going to take over. They could have got everyone out, and it shouldn't have been an issue. I don't know if it's intentional or not. It seems like it might be intentional, honestly. God, honestly.
So with Afghanistan in Australia, we've got a very, very tough border policy. Thinking about Trump's border wall, but actually being successful. So if you come by boat to Australia, you'll be sent to Nauru or Manus Island to be processed, and you could be there for years. So a very, very tough immigration policy. So when Scott Morrison, the Prime Minister, sent a C-130 over to Afghanistan to, get our boys out, he brought home 26 people, including one Afghan national, but they were mostly embassy staff. So yeah, he could have brought home like people who were like refugees, but no, because we've got such a strict immigration policy, he didn't want to bring home any people who were refugees.
That's really interesting from a country that, puts out this leftist, empathetic, caring vibe that you won't let anyone in. So yeah, tell me more about the immigration policy. So how does that work? Like, how hard is it if someone wants to immigrate to Australia? It's a year-long process and they're isolated that whole time, or how does that work?
No, that's illegal immigrants. So if you come by a boat as a refugee from the Middle East, that's what they'll send you. So you can still come here legally as a legal immigrant. And that's a standard normal process. But like illegal immigrants are sent to these two islands to be processed, and they could be there for years. Yeah. Before they're finally let into Australia.
I guess it's different with an island nation. You don't have to worry about borders that much, right? You can't. Like with the United States, with Mexico right there. Trying to keep a wall up and keep a front up is kind of absurd when you have a border that people can just walk over. But anyway, turning back to COVID, because I feel like the eyes of the U.S. are locked on Australia. You have the people from the left who are thinking and saying, we should have been more like Australia. We should be more like New Zealand. You have the people from the right saying, oh my God, look at this. This is terrifying. What's happening there? When you try to picture your own life, 5 years, 10 years from now, I guess we could split it. 2 questions. What do you hope for? What are you working for? And then the other side would be, what's your worst case scenario? Like, what do you think the worst thing that can happen would be?
So my goal right now is just, get people over the line to being libertarian. So I don't care if they're classical liberal or if they're minarchist or if they're ANCAP. As long as they're, in the realm of libertarianism, because I know that's better than what we have now. Definitely, even though classical liberals, they still support the state to some extent. It's better than what we have now, at least. And it's not realistic, with the Australian mindset, to bring them straight to ANCAP. It will be a long journey. So that's the hope, to try and at least change some people's minds and get them, open to libertarian ideas to some extent, as long as they're in that libertarian circle. I know a lot of American libertarians are very much gatekeepers. I've got definitely, as I said before, I've got flack for that. I got flack for being a law student who's a Lysander Spooner ANCAP. Because then I'm not a real libertarian either. I know a guy who with strong borders. He's not a real libertarian, according to the Americans. Not everyone, but a lot of people say that to us. It's really disheartening to see, this is how they see us. They don't see us as real libertarians. They just see us as, status to, have rhetoric there. But
I would honestly, I would not get too caught up in the opinions of libertarians in the U.S. We are very fractured, very, very divided,
yes.
which to a certain extent is healthy because we get a lot of good debates, we get a lot of good discussions, and at least at this point in time, we have freedom of speech, so we can battle back and forth. But yeah, I would not let that hold you up. Keep pushing forward. Don't get caught up with assholes in the U.S. Giving you shit.
I know. I was trying to compare the US model to what a lot of Australians are supporting, which is more of a unity stance. So we'll work with anyone to work for our common goals of liberty to any extent. So we'll work with communists, work against the government. We'll work with the right to support more free markets. We'll work with anyone who's willing to work with us to achieve our common goals. Provided that
coalition building. That's what it's all about.
Yeah,
finding people.
That's basically it.
On common issues. That's what's worked to a certain degree in the U.S. with finding, working with the left on criminal justice reform, things like that. I know that's something we talked about before, with your interest in the law. So that's what it's all about, is because it's kind of hard to get people to come in and grasp the whole, libertarian concept. It's easier to go out and find areas where you agree and build coalitions that way.
Yes, I definitely agree. Because there are so few of us down here that we have to do anything we can to, achieve our goals of liberty. In America, it's easier to be more gatekeeping because there are more libertarians there than there are down here. But because there aren't many of us, we have to do anything we can to, to achieve what we want to achieve in terms of liberty. That's the approach that we take.
Mm-hmm. So you're saying that there's not many libertarians in Australia. So when you look at the top of the show, we were talking about, it wasn't in Sydney, I guess it was in Melbourne, the protest where they broke through the lines. It seems like there is some anti-lockdown sentiment there. There's some anti-lockdown support. Is that something that you think can take hold?
So that's a mixture of conservatives who are fed up with it, who have had 6 lockdowns, and libertarians, and the far right, and QAnon. So it's QAnon, a whole different. Really? Yeah. We've got QAnon down here in Australia. It's interesting.
I don't even understand what it's. I don't understand how QAnon is still a thing, but yeah, I guess it is.
Well, I want to know what the thing down here, because we don't have Trump, worship. So I don't know how it's picked up traction down here, but apparently it has.
Yeah.
So it's a mishmash of people from all different ways of life, like even 1960s style hippies, getting involved to some extent. So it's a complete jumble of people who are anti-lockdown.
Well, that's good. I mean, in the U.S., we have the 1960s style hippies who were, having sex in the mud at Woodstock, who are now turning around and saying, "Hey, you better get vaccinated or you'll lose your job." So they've totally flip-flopped on freedom and individual choice. But yeah, that's either they were full of shit then or they're full of shit now. I'm not sure which one it is. It's
my body, my choice until it comes to vaccines, in which case it's your body, our choice.
That's what it is. And another way I like to put it, like looking at it through the lens of the war on drugs. And I do want to talk about the war on drugs in Australia and kind of how people view drugs there in a minute. But before we get to that, so tell me what you think of this concept. So at least the war on drugs in the U.S., obviously, up until this point, it's slowly starting to change, but it's been very prohibitive. Really, the only thing that has been legalized to a certain degree, recreationally and medically, has been marijuana. Everything else, extremely prohibiting what you can put in your body. And it's starting to shift now with the vaccines to, hey, this is what you must put in your body. So it's turning from a prohibition to a requirement. So I want to get your opinion if that's something that you think will happen in Australia. But first, like, what's the deal with drugs in Australia? Is it very prohibited? Is there a war on drugs in Australia?
So there's definitely a war on drugs. Not to the same extent as there is in America, but there's definitely stuff going on. So we've got a 12.5% tax on cigarettes, plus a 10% goods and services tax on cigarettes, so it's 22.5. On alcohol, there's an excise tax of 42.5% on beer, plus
42.5% on beer,
plus the GST, which then brings it to 52.5%. So
wait, is that like buying a case of beer, or is that like buying every beer you buy at a bar, or how does that work?
So I don't know. I don't usually, I haven't been able to really go to any bars recently because of the lockdowns. So I wouldn't know that. But I know,
what's the drinking age in Australia?
So it's 18.
Okay.
At 18, you can go into pubs and buy alcohol. 16, if you can drink on private property. That's the Queensland rules.
You got better laws than us there, so you got that going for us. But you can't even go out and drink now. So what does it matter?
Well, I know recently Dan Andrews, the Victorian Premier, said that you can't be drinking beer outside with your mask on. You can't be drinking any sort of alcohol outside with your mask on. So, which of course means you can't take your mask off to, drink it either. But you can't drink any alcohol down there whatsoever. So it's definitely, when push comes to shove, it's definitely, they're willing to take away the beer. But yeah, it's definitely, quite interesting down here how they got away with such a high tax on it.
So do you have medical marijuana, recreational marijuana legalized in Australia at all?
No, so we've got, as far as I know, that we've got no marijuana legalized at all. Wow.
See, that's interesting because supposedly a liberal country, you would expect to see that. So, but like, what are how harsh are the laws generally for a nonviolent drug crime? If somebody gets caught, and I'm not asking for specifics, but anecdotal stories, things like that. If somebody gets caught selling, a little bit of marijuana, what kind of punishment are they roughly looking at?
It's definitely prison time for that.
Really?
I think that if for drug use, it's prison time. For drug paraphernalia, it's prison time. They're not just going to fine you. They're very, very, very much strict on that, which you can which reflects the alcohol taxes. Even if it was legalized, it would be heavily regulated and it would be taxed. The kingdom come. Like whiskey and gin is taxed 57%. So you can imagine how much I'll tax marijuana, even for medical reasons.
Jeez, man. Yeah, that's So it's the sin tax, as they say. So yeah, that's the same thing they do in the U.S. and they do the same thing with cigarettes. And I'm sure, or maybe you didn't see, but years ago there was the famous story in New York City where Eric Garner was selling loose cigarettes on the street and he got choked out and killed by a New York City police officer for selling loose cigarettes, and the police officer walked away and did not do any prison time. So it's just fucking insane.
Well, I know in Queensland it's 15 years for drug paraphernalia, for example. So it's ridiculous is that the extent that they'll go for it. And it dates back to the end of the 19th century. That it's been going on for. So back then, the Queensland Parliament passed this was like 4 years before Federation. The Queensland colony, as was at the time, passed the Aboriginal Protection and the Restriction of the Sale of Opium Act 1897. And as part of that act was meant, you have to sell drugs and alcohol. You have a license, which brought in the equivalent of $5.5 million US, in today's money, per year. They arrested people from China for selling drugs. White people got away with it fine. So they never arrested any white people for it, only people from China. So we've had a drug war going on since the 19th century. So it's got its roots go back a fair way.
So when you look at the drug war in Australia, like on a personal level, like when you look at the stigma associated with drug crime, if somebody is convicted and gets out of prison, like, is that person shunned from society, or like how's that culturally?
So culturally, most people are opposed to any sort of drug legalization. So definitely they'll be opposed to that as well. There was coming from where I am right now in the middle of a Bible Belt, like when they legalized euthanasia, for example, people were complaining about that because that's too liberal. So very, very, very much an anti-drug culture, even when people who, have been supposedly been through prison and are supposedly have been rehabilitated, like even those people are, shunned. Even though we're told the legal system will mean that, they've been rehabilitated and they're not going to be repeat offenders, they still get shunned largely.
Yeah, that's a shame. And I feel like it's gotten a little bit better in the States. I feel like we're kind of treading backwards now, but I feel like we had some momentum. The end of Barack Obama's term, there was a lot of, he granted clemency to a lot of nonviolent offenders. There still are people, but there were a lot more people who were doing life sentences for selling marijuana in U.S. prisons. And Obama let some out. Trump let more out, but there's still more in there. And it's insane that we still live in that world where there's people in prison for selling pot, people who just got out, and then we have multi-million-dollar companies who are now allowed to sell it, and people who are still in prison for selling it. It's absurd. But so let me just turn it over to you and tell me a little bit more about your mission, what you'd like to accomplish. I know you're getting more involved with your local libertarian party there. And I should say again, going under the name LibertyDownUnder. That's at LibertyDownUnder. The under does not have the E, so give them a follow on Twitter. Tell me a little bit about like best case scenario, looking forward a couple years. What would you like to see happen in Australia with the Liberty movement?
So I'm very much a grassroots kind of person. So, on Twitter, I've been actively getting a group of libertarians in Australia together. So, we can spread the word about what's happening down here. But, I'm very much, I love grassroots work and, networking. So that's my goal for the next couple of years, is to get that grassroots system network in place, win the cultural war, because it's more important. You can't win the political war till you win the cultural war. So that's my priority, is, to get people, to, bring them into the libertarian tent. And, that way we can win the cultural war first, because you're not going to win politics until, you change people's mindsets. And so you win the hearts and minds of the people, which is what I'm going to try and do.
So what's a cultural issue you think that can draw people to the ideas of liberty other than lockdowns?
So probably a big one would be, this is where we can appeal to the left, would be immigration. Would be a big area. A lot of the left is opposed to how harsh the immigration laws are right now. So it's definitely a place that we can, make contact with them and try and bring them into the circle. So that's definitely like a big area that I want to focus on once we get through these lockdowns. Is, immigration is definitely a big area I want to see changed. Because, again, doing international relations, I hear about all these stories from the Middle East, how horrifying it is over there. And they try and come to Australia for freedom because I've heard about how good Australia is, and then we turn them away. So, I really want to see that changed. And I think the way to do that is to work with the left. Definitely, like our Greens party is pretty good on immigration, even though they're like, they're the same as your party basically. They're the same as American Greens, but they're pretty good in immigration. So working with them, they've got I think 8 or 9 senators in the federal parliament. So working with them to try and make headway is definitely what I want to do.
They're doing better. They're doing better than American Greens. American Greens have no power here, but I mean, I've met a bunch. They're caring people. They're generally nice people from the ones that I've met. So I have nothing against the Greens in the U.S. But
that's because we've got preferential voting. So there are 12 senators per state, not 2. Mm-hmm. And preferential voting means that like minor parties can get senators in. So the Liberal Democrats, which are the main Libertarian party, that I used to be involved with, they had a senator at one point from New South Wales, a guy named David Leyonhjelm. He's been heralded as Australia's Ron Paul. But he got in because we have preferential voting. So the Liberal Democrats are definitely trying to go for the upper house, try and, get libertarians in there. They've got 2 in the Victorian upper house as well.
So definitely can you explain real quickly how preferential voting works?
So you label down the ballot paper, 1 to 6 or 1 to 5 if it's for the lower house. You label 1 to 6, 1 to 5, however many candidates there are. You've got to give everyone a number, and you've got to label 1 to 6 for the Senate. I think it's 1 to 6. I haven't voted in a Senate election. I have voted in lower house elections, but not a Senate election because Queensland, my state, we had our election last year, but we don't have a Senate. We've just got one House of Parliament, the lower house. So I haven't voted in any Senate elections yet, but we've got a federal election next year.
So you label 1 to 6. So you rank those 6 in the order you'd want them, and then there's the points assigned for each ranking, and then that's how you determine who wins.
Yes. Yes, that's how it works. So often the Liberal National Party will work with other right-wing parties. Probably the bigger one we have is One Nation. You may have heard of Pauline Hanson, who's a very controversial figure down here. She pulled a stunt where she turned up into Parliament House wearing a burqa to make a point that you can't tell people's faces if they're wearing a burqa, saying we should ban the burqa, which is very controversial. But often the Liberal Party will do a preferencing deal with her party. So, you vote Liberal 1 and then vote One Nation 2. And they'll One Nation will tell their voters to do One Nation 1, Liberal Party number 2. So, that way, if they don't get in, the other party does get in. They try and work things like that.
They should do the, with the masking, to show that we should not be wearing masks. They should sneak some politicians into the Capitol in the U.S. wearing masks and wigs so you can't tell who they are. It would be funny. That would be a good prank. So
we've had a couple of federal MPs go against lockdowns and restrictions. George Christensen from the Liberal Party, he's probably the most recent one, and he got criticised from the left and the right for being anti-lockdown.
Mm-hmm.
So politicians, get screwed over. Like if they're actually trying to be anti-lockdown. The 2 Liberal Democrat senators in Victoria for the state parliament protested on the grounds of parliament by sitting in chairs out the front for the duration of the day until late at night, to protest Dan Andrews, the Premier, closing down playgrounds for kids. The police were waiting to arrest them once they got off parliament grounds. I don't know if they were arrested, but their argument was you can't arrest us on parliament grounds because we're politicians, we're doing our parliamentary duty. So they were able to get around the cops that way, but yeah, there are a few politicians who are anti-lockdown, anti-mask, but not many at all. So
what about the media in Australia? In the U.S., basically anybody who is, sympathetic to the ideas of liberty, sympathetic to freedom, understands that it's the corporate press, it's the pharmaceutical press, they have their agenda. What's the media like in Australia?
It's pretty much like you guys. So one of our biggest federal newspapers is The Australian, and they're the people who called the Liberal Democrat liberals. They called them hard right. So the media is definitely very much anti. The only exception we have there is Sky News, who are a bit like Fox News in America. So they're a bit more anti-restrictions, anti-COVID lockdowns, but they're pretty isolated in that stance.
All right, Liberty Down Under. I'm going to turn it over to you. You know, this has been about an hour. This has been a great interview, and I want you to plug everything that you're working on, your personal stuff, anything else that you have out there. Please tell my audience where they can find you, where they can help you, all that stuff.
So you can find me at LibertyDownUnder with an E in under on Instagram and no E on Twitter, because Twitter you have to have a 15-letter cap. So it's a bit confusing, you know, having that missing E, but, you know, it is what it is. The party I'm getting involved with is Australia's representatives, AusRep. So if you follow me on Twitter, I'll be definitely promoting their stuff. We're looking at setting up a podcast. We'll probably be the first libertarian podcast in Australia. So definitely listen to that one so you can get it a good feel about what's going on down here culture-wise. That's probably the biggest thing right now I'm going to try and work on is, you know, we need in America, you want a real libertarian. If you don't have a podcast, down here, no one has their own podcast. So, you know, I want to try and, you know, get some podcasts out there, you know, get the word out more than just, you know, tweets about it.
Yeah, definitely let us know when you get that podcast off the ground. We'll, you know, help you with publicizing that, tweeting it out, all that good stuff. So,
yeah, I've had a few Americans come, because I'm moving in American circles online. I've had several Americans say, you know, when you get the podcast up, we can help you with publishing it and how, you know, edit it and sort of stuff. I'm probably not going to be a main host because, you know, just got so much stuff on right now, you know, working part-time, university full-time, plus all the social media stuff. So I probably won't be a host, but I'll definitely be a regular guest on, hopefully.
Awesome. Well, looking forward to see everything that comes out, and definitely, you know, as libertarians in the U.S., I think everyone is looking at Australia, and you know, we're hopeful that things get better for you all. And I don't know, man. I mean, it's not that the U.S. is that much better. I just hope the world wakes the hell up in the next year here.
Yeah.
And the next time you and I talk, this is all behind us, so we can talk about advancing liberty and not worry about all this lockdown bullcrap.
Yes, agreed.
All right, buddy. Well, thanks for coming on the show, and we will talk soon.
Thank you.
Hope you guys enjoyed that episode. Another awesome guest here on Finding Freedom. I'm really excited about, you know, all of the great guests I've had on recently, and excited about the direction of the podcast, of the Lions of Liberty brand, things we're doing. One of the things we're doing, guys, is if you haven't been to the Lions of Liberty store, if you haven't seen our t-shirt designs, we just rolled out a new one. It's freaking awesome. It's our Hands Up, Don't Nuke t-shirt. And if you just go to lionsofliberty.store, you'll see it right there at the top of the page. You can browse through, check out everything we got there. But I really highly recommend picking up one or two of these shirts, and you're going to love it. It's got the redneck-looking guy with his hands up, with the bombs pointed at him, big lettering, Hands Up, Don't Nuke, put together by our good friend Dan Smots. You're going to love this T-shirt. You can get it two ways. Like I said, you can go to lionsofliberty.store, pick it up that way. Or if you join the Lions of Liberty Pride at a certain level, you actually get a free t-shirt when you join, and you can pick that. Or just by joining the Pride, you get access to a discount on on all the merchandise we have in the store. So you can buy it that way as well. And we have, of course, we have the Taxation is Death t-shirts. We have our original designs. I got the old school Felony Friday stuff. Brian has his Electric Liberty Land t-shirts, and Mark has the original, the OG Lions of Liberty PBR logo shirt. We got the Are You Ready to Roar shirt, and we've had a ton of different designs. We've never taken anything down. It's all there. So check it out. lionsofliberty.store. thank you guys for listening to today's episode. Such an important episode. And thank you for everything you do supporting us. We really do appreciate it. All right, guys, this is John Odermatt signing off. Always remember to keep your head up and the fires of liberty burning.